Hi folks, I appreciate your bearing with me here because I'm relatively new to using this smooth draw the background sheet here, but hopefully this is going to work out well for us. In any case, I wanted to walk you through a quick review of the cardiac conduction system, the electrophysiology. So in order to do that, I'm going to start out with my world famous drawing of a heart here. And yes, I drew this in advance. I was not able to do this one quite on the fly. So in any case, I've got my view of the heart here. And I'm going to slip up here and throw in yellow. I have the SA node. The SA node here is a rate of 60 to 100 per minute. That's the normal cardiac pacemaker. It's otherwise known as the sinoatrial node or the cardiac sinus. That's essentially what causes our heart to tick on a normal, healthy person. So that's our general normal pacemaker. Next, we have the AV junction. That's kind of the next to fire, and this is all kind of review from the videos that you had before. But the AV junction basically sits around in the middle between the atria and the ventricles. It's the four corners junction waypoint. Electrically, it's not perfectly centered, and yes, if you start digging deeper into the anatomy, you'll find some variations on this, and there's a couple of different structures that sit within there. You have the AV node and the interventricular pathways, and of course there's a bundle of wires that runs between the yellow and the purple dots here that connects that, known as the intraatrial pathways, and we've got several different paths on there. You've got an outer, middle, and left, middle, and right pathways on there, and then you got Bachman's bundle, but that gets a little deeper than what we really need to do for our purposes in the class. I do want you to get these numbers down, though. I can promise you'll see them on the tests coming up here, test 1, and probably just about every test that you take. You might see them occasionally on quizzes as well. So I know you've seen them already if you've taken the one quiz. But I have the AV junction, and then after that, then we start to work our way down a little further into the ventricles. We have the His bundle, or otherwise known as the bundle of His, and then I have a right and left bundle branch, and I did a really sloppy drawing on here, but you can see that on the left side we have a left anterior and a left posterior fascicle. So those two different components, you don't have to get deep into there. The idea is that in order to get to the ventricles, the signal has to split out. It has to separate between right and left. The atria up there by the SA node, between the SA node and the AV junction, can kind of do this all in one big quick shot. But the ventricles have to actually split this stuff off in order to be able to get the signal to come out. And last but not least, we continue on down there and we throw these little orange fibers in there. Those are known as the Purkinje fibers. And that entire structure on here, I understand that for a true anatomologist here, somebody that's really deep into anatomy, this is kind of a gross oversimplification for right now, but it gives you a rough idea here. The His bundle, the bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers all sit within the ventricles. And when the Purkinje fibers, when this set of structures that sit within the ventricles are running the show, essentially we have a heart rate that runs between 15 or 20 up to 40 beats per minute. So the SA node is the normal pacemaker. It's our standard resting heart rate. It wants to fire between 60 and 100 beats per minute. The AV junction is the backup pacemaker, primary backup pacemaker that is, and it fires between 40 to 60 beats per minute. And then the His bundle, bundle branches, Purkinje fibers, those structures that are down in the ventricles, fire at a rate of 20 to 40 per minute. That gives you a relatively quick, rough overview of what these different structures are. So what I'm going to do is turn these off for a second, and now I want to talk to you about what actually happens when I have a cardiac depolarization. Well, this is just your very brief, quick intro into what happens with a waveform. How do we actually see this electrical energy? There's some videos that I'm going to link for you as well that you're welcome to look through. I think they're really good. They get into the sodium-potassium pump and how all these other components work. But for our pay grade, for our level, what I'm really interested in is you understanding what the different wave components are in an EKG, and you're going to use this to determine what is normal. And anything that falls off of the normal category, that's what's going to tell us what the name of the rhythm is. So if it's too fast, it's not normal. It has a different name. If it's too slow, it has a different name. If the conduction isn't happening fast enough, that's got a different name. So everything really stems off of these key rules of what makes a heart rhythm normal. So let's start out here. I'm going to come back up here, and if I had my, well, let me get rid of our error message here. I'm going to go ahead, and I guess I have to turn the, oh, I know what I can do. Let's do it this way. All right. So if I come up here, I'm going to start out, I'm going to redraw my SA node here. If I start a wave at this point in time, and it's the adjacent cells, remember we've got conductivity, so when these cells depolarize, the excitability in the adjacent cells, they're going to want to they're going to want to contract along with these cells. So what happens is you get this little wave-like formation here. And then after that, these cells, and these cells, and these cells, and this actually has the ability through those other pathways to bridge across and get over to the other side here as well. So this is happening simultaneously. Drawing a little sloppy, but you get the idea. And what we have is the blood is getting pushed here from the atria down through the tricuspid and bicuspid valves into the ventricles. So this takes place first. Now, I start out and I have a nice flat line, no electrical activity is taking place, and then I'm going to see this little round hump. So I see just that one little bump that's up there. Let me get the cursor out of the way. All right. So I see that one little rounded hump that takes place. Well, this at this point is the atrial depolarization. And Wilhelm Einthoven, when he went through this, had tried to determine what the heck is actually going on here. He was able to see that it was the atria that were depolarizing. I'm going to go over this in your lecture, so you'll have a bit of an overview, but I wanted you to have a video version of this to kind of refer to because I'm going to go through fairly quick in class. So, if I come back over here, this is the atrial depolarization. So let's get an arrow there, and that's atrial depolarization. Sorry, I'm going to abbreviate here a little bit, just in order to save some space. But the atrial depolarization here. And he wasn't sure exactly how this fit in the cycle, so he arbitrarily chose the letter P to start this process off, and he called this a P wave. So a P wave represents the atria when they're depolarizing. Now, once that's occurred, then we have a little bit of a pause, and we come back up here. So if I continue my line here, I'm going to switch colors so we can kind of differentiate this. There's a little bit of a gap. There's a bit of a pause between when the atria and the ventricles are trying to depolarize. That's a good thing. We want that to happen. Essentially, what's happening here is that, I know I'm changing colors on you a bit, but that's essentially when the electrical signal hangs out there in the AV junction for a short bit. Kind of hangs out at Starbucks there. So at that point, there's about a 1/10 of a second delay between the atria and the ventricles, between 1 and 2/10 of a second in a normal heart. Then this is going to work its way on down. I'm going to borrow our orange color once again, and the signal again works its way down through to the base of the heart. And I'm going to oversimplify this once again. You remember the Purkinje fibers, there's all kinds of cells all the way up and down both sides of the heart here that are depolarizing at once. But in a general sense here, what's happening is the ventricles, I'll tell you what, I'm going to change color. I'm going to change my mind here. And I'm just going to, now that you've seen with the orange how it gets down to the bottom, we're going to start down at the bottom, but I'm going to do this in green so it's a little more obvious. And your ventricles are going to depolarize from the bottom upward, like so. And again, if everything's working the way it's supposed to, then they're going to go from bottom to top, and they'll both depolarize at the same time. Well, when you see this happening, it's a massive number of cells. There's a huge amount of electrical energy. And the other videos that I'm linking get into a little more depth on there, but for your purposes, again, this idea that there's a huge number of cells in the ventricles, vast, vast numbers, thousands of times the number of cells that there are in the atria. What happens is, let's get my cursor back, you'll get this big, huge, big, tall, up-down, spiky, pointy thing, as I like to refer to it. And this mess here, if I come back over, let's get my cursor, this little bit here where it's going up and down, I'm going up and down from the baseline. Now, generally speaking, on a normal heartbeat, it'll be all positive. There might be a little bit of negative, but it's predominantly positive. But for our purposes, I'm just drawing it both up and down here to show you that it's up and down motion that you're seeing. But it's a very tall and narrow spike that typically happens here. This is the ventricular depolarization. So we'll go ahead, get our arrow in here. This is ventricular depolarization. And now, when Einthoven was looking at this, he realized that there's some up, there's some down, there's some up, there's some down. It's kind of back and forth a bit. So he reserves several letters for this. And we're going to get into this in a bit more depth once we get to 12 lead. But essentially, for the moment here, I want you to refer to this here is known as the QRS complex. It's not actually a single wave here. There's a Q wave, there's an R wave, and an S wave. In the one that I drew, there's actually just an R and an S. But suffice it to say, we'll get into that deeper at a later date. For right now, I have the QRS complex. That represents the ventricular depolarization. And finally, all good things must come to an end. So once we get done with this, I'm just going to switch to the red color just because it stands out and it's nice and easy. I'm going to come back over here, and we got a little bit of a flat baseline. And then you get more of kind of a bell curve-like thing like this. And it's a larger hump because what's happening here is you actually have repolarization that's occurring. And I'm going to put ventricular, I'm going to abbreviate here, repolarization. I put the ventricular there in parentheses because we know the ventricles are repolarizing there. This is an awful lot of energy that's taking place at this point. But it's kind of a gradual process. It's a much more passive process. This is the diastole phase of the cardiac cycle. This is really when the heart is returning to rest and everything is resetting itself. So this isn't a highly strong active process. If you remember, I talked about vasodilation. There's really not so much a dilation. It's just the blood has the ability to flow back into the heart during this time. This is what we refer to in our system as the preload. This is how much blood can make it back into the heart to be ready to pump. And essentially, if I come up here, the name on this one, quite logically, this is our T wave. So we have a P wave, we have a QRS, and we have a T wave. That's essentially the overview of what each of these three little components are. Next video I'm going to do here, I'm going to kind of break this down and I'm going to tell you what are the basic characteristics of a sinus rhythm. I can tell you that when you see that, you're going to need to know this upside down and backwards. But feel free to review this video as much as you want. I'm going to go through some of this in class with you, but it gives you a chance to at least see these components here, and it's kind of neat with the different colors.